Hello everybody, can you hear me? Yes. Good morning. Viva? Viva! South Africa! Viva! Viva Nelson Mandela!
Viva!
Viva ANC!
Viva!
Viva Palestine!
Viva!
Viva PLO!
Viva!
Viva Yasser Arafat!
Viva!
Viva Mahmoud Abbas!
Viva!
Viva President Zuma!
Viva!
Okay, that's a very good start. I do literally and physically shiver as I stand before you today. I am really inspired and touched to be looking at people who have been the story of inspiration for many nations all over the world. Real fighters, but fighters with belief, fighters with grasp of where they're going, and fighters who have achieved, not everything, but they have achieved the basic ideals of freedom, justice, democracy. I also shiver because I stand in this very hall that has hosted the first National Assembly in 1994, Provincial Assembly. And I am standing just next by the speaker of that assembly at that very moment and that very time, Mr. Trevor Fowler. What a day it was for you, Brother Trevor. What a day to start a journey of building, to start a journey of inclusive and coexistence and building a South Africa for all. So I salute you, I salute your friends in the ANC. I will touch on three main issues very quickly. The first is the situation in Palestine. The second, what are we going to do about it? And the third and the last is the South African-Palestinian relationship, and that's exactly why we are here. The situation in Palestine could be summarized like this. In 1948, we were subjected to an ethnic cleansing campaign, physically, literally, by the meaning of the word ethnic cleansing. There were a colonial settler exercise, and a war erupted when 2/3 of our nation had to flee under gunpoint, the threat of the war, to flee their homes and villages, that they became now refugees, diaspora, scattered all over the world. And ever since 1948, that's more than 67 years ago, none of them have been able to go back to their homes, farms, livelihoods, memories. They've been blocked by the state of Israel for almost 7 decades. And guess what? Some of them, the majority of them, are refugees in their own home, inside the historic land of Palestine, yet they are blocked from going back to their own homes. Some of them had to travel, but around Palestine, mostly in Jordan, Syria, Egypt, under the hope that they will go back. And they have been there in these refugee camps for almost 7 decades, unable to go back. 20 years later, we had another war, 1967, when Israel conquered the rest of historic Palestine, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. Since then, we have been under, that part of Palestine, have been under military occupation. People are subjected to military rule, subjected to various forms of oppression, segregations, discrimination. And soon after the occupation in 1967, that's 45 years ago, soon after that, a colonization process started in the 22%, in the West Bank, Jerusalem, and Gaza, whereby now we have no control or real presence of almost 60% of what left of Palestine, which is the 22%. In the last few years, we have seen new policies like siege. 1.8 million Palestinians in Gaza are under total siege from the land, from the sea. They cannot move, they cannot leave, they cannot enter, they cannot work, simply put in a prison. And even prison have rules, but the Gaza siege has no rules. Has no rules. People were made to dig tunnels to provide for their babies. People were sent to the dark ages only because of their political views. only because of their political aspirations. Some of the ANC comrades came and visited us in the last few years. Each delegation of the ANC concluded after the visit that actually what you also have in Palestine is not just ethnic cleansing and occupation and colonization and siege. What you have is an apartheid system that is way worse than what we had in South Africa. One of them said to me, a leader of the ANC, said to me that actually what we had in South Africa was a picnic compared to what we've seen here. In South Africa during apartheid, we did not have roads only for the white or roads for the black, but in Palestine, we do have roads only for the Israelis and roads only for the Palestinians. In Israel, there are laws that decides upon who should you love and who should you marry. If you fall in love with the wrong person, you are not allowed to marry or unite with that person. I don't think that happened even in the worst days of apartheid here. But there are so many similarities of the segregation and the discrimination between us and you. You know, confiscating big chunks of land and building it only for one race, for one color, for one creed happened here. The Grouping Act, remember the Grouping Act? That's the Israeli settlements. We are not allowed to live in the Israeli settlements. We are not allowed to even enter the Israeli settlements. So we have all these forms of oppressions and control. What for? Why are they doing it? Maybe the example of apartheid here was primarily that of control and privileges. They wanted to control the rest of the population through the mechanisms of segregation. Why are the Israeli governments doing this? You know what? I wish it was only a matter of control. What we are facing in Palestine, comrades, is a displacement and replacement campaign. We are gradually being displaced and replaced. It's a zero-sum game. It's a game that negates us, negates our existence, as if we don't exist. Some of us had hopes for 21 years. We have been into a peace process. Even some of us had hopes up until 3 days ago or 4 days ago when we had another Israeli national elections. Some of us thought that a change could come from within Israel. Regrettably, unfortunately, the Israeli voters re-elected Benjamin Netanyahu. Some of you don't know Benjamin Netanyahu, but he said two things just in the run-up to the elections. The first is that if he wins again, he's been the Prime Minister of Israel for several years. Now he's called the King of Israel. If re-elected, I will block the emergence of a Palestinian state. What a statement. His main mission is to block our right of self-determination. And the second thing he said is that he calls for all Jewish Israeli voters to go in numbers because the Arab voters are voting in numbers. The Arab voters are citizens of Israel. Can you imagine a South African leader saying to the black community or the African community, go and vote because the whites are voting? Or vice versa? Then the question for us, friends, is if change cannot come from within and with such striking suffering and pain, illegality, injustice, what to do about it? We've tried the road of peace, program director. We've tried it for 21 years. We have recognized Israel on 78% of our land. On 78% of our land. We have gone through endless processes of peace talks. These peace talks have turned from a process to liberate us to a process to further colonize us, to further subjugate us to all the policies I've described, to further steal the land and the resources, to further isolate and segregate and discriminate and put people under blockade, to further dehumanize us while we were making peace. We started this peace process 21 years ago called the Oslo process. We had less than 200 Israeli settlers in the 22% in the West Bank and Jerusalem and Gaza. Today, we are talking about 750,000. While we are talking, while we are making peace, while we are negotiating. So the question, and this brings me to my second point, what to do about it? You know, yes, sometimes you do mistakes. Sometimes your calculations and assumptions are not accurate, and I will not, this is not a forum to go into the details. But we have realized a few years back that we were actually engaged in a process, the peace process, in a process that was not really a peace process. It was a game of deceit, a cover-up, a smoke screen. A cover-up for the real policies of taking what left of our homeland, of driving away what left of our people. A cover-up for the ugly policies of a full-fledged apartheid. A cover-up for the daily war crimes committed against our people. A cover-up for the slaughterhouse they did in Gaza a few months ago in the summer. We are talking. We are discussing. We are hopeful. But on the ground, their doing are so different than the rhetoric and the words. We as a national movement have committed to the cause of peace for all these years, and I commit to you again to the cause of peace. But peace for us is different than what the Israeli officials mean by peace. Peace is not an extension of occupation. Peace is not a management of the status quo. Peace is not the continuation of theft or the continuation of murder or discrimination or denial. Peace is a true recognition of the other. Peace is a true realization that you and the other are equal. And we know that for all these years, the one enemy we have is that unfortunately Israel did not feel it had to make real peace. The cost-benefit equation was so tilting in their side. The asymmetry of power. We have the right, we have the law, we have the support of millions of people, but we do not have the gun, we do not have the tank, we do not have the air force. Israel is the fourth strongest air force on earth. Israel gets the F-35s from the US before the US Army gets it. Israel has received from Germany last year 6 submarines that they could hide deep in the waters and no radar in the world could detect it. And guess what? These submarines could fire nuclear bombs, warheads, anywhere in the world, obliterate entire countries, and you still don't know where this rocket came from. You will never know. This is what we are facing and up to. By and large, we are an unarmed civilian population. Yeah, but don't worry. You know, you cannot win over nations by such weapons. In the end, nations like yours and nations like ours have their own way of resilience and steadfastness and survivability, and in the end, triumph as well. So, we are now on a journey to raise the cost of their illegalities, to raise the cost of their occupation, to raise the cost of their colonization. There is no other formula, but there is one new thinking that was inspired by you. We want to raise the cost of their occupation and their illegalities non-violently. Non-violently. We don't want to buy 6 submarines from Germany. We don't want to develop an arsenal of nuclear weapons. We don't want to get from the US the most advanced. We don't even want to produce weapons to kill others and export to the world terrorism. We don't want that. We want to mobilize our people. We have 12 million Palestinians who believe in their cause, and we want to mobilize with them a mass movement outside. This is the best answer to Israel's tanks and Israel's flights. And we know what we need to do to raise the cost and to make every Israeli realize that the alternative is much worse than peace, that they cannot get away with it, that they cannot have the cake and eat it too, that they are not above international law, that they do not have a culture of impunity. No one is immune when you kill children, when you wipe out families. No one is immune. We are taking Israel to court. Every war crime that has been committed in my country, Israel will be held accountable. From the murder in Gaza, to the theft of land, to the suffocation of Jerusalem, to the isolation and segregation of our communities, to the Bantustalization of our communities, Israel will have to be held accountable. And you know, you've heard about our UN work that we are now, since 2012, we are now a state in the UN system. We are an observer state in the UN system. We will use that in every single political, diplomatic, and legal forum to make sure that we raise the cost of this occupation. You have heard that our president, President Mahmoud Abbas, signed the Rome Statute. That's the framework for the ICC, the International Criminal Court, where international law is applied. And there we are taking Israel. But when we announced that, you know what Israel did? They withheld our own money. You know, we have also revenues collected on our behalf. So as a form of punishment, they withheld the money of the government because they are in control of everything, of the borders, of the crossings, of the ports, of the airports. So they collect the money and they reimburse whatever left after they deduct their own expenses. What is our formula for this? Number one, unity. We as Palestinians must unite. And you know what? We are united now. We have one entity that represents every single Palestinian. That is the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO. We have one government in Palestine that serves and represents every Palestinian inside. That's the National Consensus Government, which includes Fatah, that I represent, and includes Hamas. The forces against us to disunite, to be fragmented, are huge. And all what you hear is also the work of the occupier, because Israel is very interested in keeping us divided. And I know it's not going to be easy to stay united. And I know it's not going to be easy to continue on the unity track. And we know that Israel waged the latest war on Gaza because we formed that national consensus government. It was a coup d'etat against our national consensus government. We know. And that's why we know Israel's main strategy is to chop us into disconnected communities, into weaker communities, into Bantustans. We will face that with our absolute religious adherence to unity. Number two, we shall fight. We will fight. There is no other formula but to struggle, to resist. Resistance in our situation is not an option. It's not an option. It's an obligation. It's an obligation to resist those who are coming to take away your home. It's an obligation to resist those who aim to replace you, to deny you, to negate you, to dehumanize you, to murder your children, your families. It's an obligation. And it is not just a Palestinian obligation. It is a global obligation. Like Nelson Mandela said, the South African freedom is incomplete until Palestine is free. No injustice is particular to one nation. Injustice is injustice anywhere. It's not subdivided. And the ideals of freedom and democracy are not ideals that only apply to the Palestinians or the Israelis. They are not ideals that only me as a Palestinian should fight for, or you as a South African should fight for. The human family at large must join us in this struggle, as the human family joined you in your struggle. And the Israelis know that this is happening. They are watching. We've seen the BDS movement yesterday here in South Africa. We met the ANC leadership. We met your mayor and the councillors. We went to your students and your universities. And we found real partners, real allies, people who are willing to be not only fighting as a solidarity, but considering it their own fight. And I'd like to end here by saying that we came to your beautiful, gorgeous country, already feeling inspired that we will be going to the place where justice has been found, where sheer oppression has been uprooted, where a journey of building started. And that was enough of an inspiration for the mayor and the delegation and myself. But I assure you, our inspiration as we were coming here is nothing compared to our inspiration as we are leaving. As we are going back home, we are full of empowerment that actually our own long walk to freedom is near the end. We are almost there. We are almost there. You know why? You know why? Because you cannot, tanks cannot win without morality, without legality, without the support of the people of the world. And we see it. We saw it in South Africa, the real full-hearted support. We see it in Europe. We even see it in the United States of America. Communities coming out. We see it in the Jewish communities worldwide, saying, including yesterday, not in my name, not in my name. We see the transformation of the global public opinion. We see that you cannot hide injustice. We see that you cannot spin your murder. And we see that the truth is coming out, and we see the mobilization and the mass mobilization of people like you worldwide. Today coincides with two major events, as was said by my sister Molela. The first is our Mother's Day, and I tell you, we have Palestinian mothers that have been the major source of strength and empowerment. They have learned the hard lesson of displacement, of oppression, and they invested so much in their daughters and sons. They invested so much in making a society that is resilient and capable to receive shocks. We salute our mothers and we salute your mothers in such a day. We also salute that today is the Human Rights Day in South Africa. And it's all about human rights, my friends. Forget about all the discussion and the debate and the argument about religion. God is innocent of all this. God is innocent of the murder. God is innocent of the discrimination. God does not choose people. He loves all of us. All of us. God does not distribute land. God wants us to have fair share of the land. God is used by those who have greed, by those who want to control. And those who make God a tribal God are making a big mistake. God is not tribal. And I just want to end that the same people are not just working against Palestinians. They are also working against the majority Israeli Jews in Israel. Because I tell you, 70% of the Israeli Jews would want to see peace happen. But they are silenced as much as we are silenced. It's the very few who have the resources and who have the power to get away with what they're doing. Something very similar to what happened here. And in such a day, I just want to end by saying two great men started their journey in the 60s. One was Nelson Mandela, and the second was Yasser Arafat. The two decided to take their cause and their rights and to fight the injustices. And the two said at the very same time almost that these ideals, the ideals of freedom, of justice, of democracy, of equity, of social cohesion, are ideals that we are going to live for. And if needs be, we are prepared to die for. Fortunately, the great Mandela saw his dream happen right in front of his eyes. He lived for it. He fought for it. Our leader had to die for it. He paid for his life for it. And you know what? He told us a few days before he was killed. And he was imprisoned for many years in his muqata and his headquarters in Ramallah by the Israeli occupation forces. He said that if the Israelis think that my life is more important than my people and my cause, they are mistaken. I will pay the ultimate price for my cause, and he did. For that he shall remain a hero, a father, a founder of our real liberation. I just want to end with talking to you. In Palestine, we're going to go back and say this. Occupation, no more. No more. No more. Apartheid, no more. No more. Siege, no more. No more. And you know what? We very much look forward to the day when we come to this very hall to celebrate the liberation of Palestine and the liberation of our land. Thank you very much. Your idea, ma'am, that women is a force of good, women is a force of peace, but women are a source of birth and life. We men often do a lot of messy things. And I very much like your idea, because even in Israel, you know, in Israel there were 4 women who did a campaign in 2006 that led to Israeli evacuation of southern Lebanon and ending of their control of southern Lebanon. So I salute your idea. I also salute all this enthusiasm for bringing an end to the illegality through hitting them in the pockets, supporting the BDS movement, the boycott, sanctions, and divestment from Israel. This is the way forward. There were few ideas that have been floating. What the UN can do for us. Why are we taking Israel to court? The international system is controlled by the superpowers. You know, you are the best who know that sometimes you have to use whatever is available for you. And sometimes you even have to use the very system, your question, sir, the very system that is discriminating against you, to challenge it, to transform it, to change it. We had an experience only a few days ago when the Palestinians who live in Israel proper decided to unite in one list, in one Knesset list. Knesset is the Israeli parliament. And because they united and because they presented themselves as such, even the Israeli system discriminates against them. Inbuilt discrimination, inherent discrimination. Yet they decided to use that opportunity that they can vote for them to challenge the very system they are joining. And that's not a bad idea. Sometimes it's not just about you legitimizing the system by working from within it, but your ability to challenge the system and to change it eventually. And they won third. They won the third place in terms of the Israeli political system. So now they are the third biggest bloc. That might not allow them to alter, challenge, transform the system altogether, but at least that will empower them to block the attempts by the Israeli far right-wing coalitions and parties and groups to undermine their very rights, to undermine their existence. By the same token, we Palestinians under occupation are also have to use the international system that is not perfect. And yes, you are right, sir. The international system is controlled by the US, is controlled by major superpowers. And you know what? If the international system was not, we would have had our freedom long ago. And we know we are not just fighting the Israeli government, and we know we are fighting an international system, but we want to use this system to the best of our advantage. And even if we don't end up getting what we want, at least we expose, we embarrass, we point, we blame. We cannot sit still. But the international system and the UN is not the whole story. Our sole superpower is you. What is being created now in terms of the power of the people of the world worldwide, and your power to decide on your own that I am going to fight this with my stomach, with my food, with the clothes I wear, I will fight this with every mean I have, is way stronger than the international system, because we, the citizens of the world, make the international system. We even make it either complicit or we make it involved and responsible. And I believe for too many years, the international system has not really represented the true depth of solidarity and feeling with Palestine. The one major issue, and we are also, this is not just about the international solidarity and the BDS. We in Palestine are doing two main things. The first, we are standing up and resisting on a daily basis. Every day there is a Palestinian who is murdered or killed. Every day there are many Palestinians who are arrested. Men, women, children. We have hundreds of children, kids in Israeli jails. We are resisting by being and staying, only staying in our homes. We are resisting the sheer force that wants us out of our own land. But we are also resisting by the power of the popular resistance. Every day, every week, we have demonstrations, sit-ins, confrontations with the Israeli occupying forces in villages like Bil'in and Ne'alim and in Nabi Saleh and Kufr Kaddoum, everywhere. And we have had success stories of these popular resistance, and we will continue to resist this. But also, we have another battle to wage while we are resisting, while we are getting your support, the battle of the mayor and his colleagues, the battle of building, of providing the education that you asked for. Despite the most adverse circumstances, we have one of the most educated population in the region. Do you know that UNESCO in 1997 said Palestine has the most, UNESCO is the world, the United Nations education, science, and culture. They said the Palestinian people have, in relative terms, have the most PhD graduates in the region. Despite the occupation, the oppression, the denial, the blockage, the siege, and what have you, our mothers and our society is investing so much in our human capital, in our ability to resist and be resilient and sustain. And their battle of building is not less important than the battle of resisting. Because remember, we want to also make sure that our people have the means to steadfast, to remain. And that's why what the mayor has done in the last 2 days, and what you have done with him in building this alliance, this twinship between the municipality of Ramallah and the municipality of Johannesburg, is not less important than boycotting Israel or isolating Israel. It goes hand in hand. Both go hand in hand. Last point I want to answer is about ISIS and about Israel. The conflict in Palestine, let me just say something. The conflict in Palestine is not a conflict between Jews and Muslims. It is not. There are Jewish Palestinians. And there are non-Jewish Israelis. Do you know that in this panel, most of my delegation are Palestinian Christians? The mayor is a Christian. The elected two members of the politicians, the councillors, are Christians. Most of the aide are Christians. And I found out that only the day before yesterday, because we don't ask, what is your religion? They are Palestinians. That's the society we have. That's the civilization we have been part of for millennia. That's the tolerance, the coexistence, the non-discrimination based on anything, on religion, on creed, on color, and what have you. Israel wants to portray it as if it's a war between Muslims and Jews. Israel wants to portray it as if it's a war between Israel and ISIS. We condemn ISIS. ISIS is a force of evil. ISIS does not speak on behalf of Palestinians, it does not speak on behalf of Islam, it does not speak on behalf of anybody. But ISIS is the creation of the injustices that has been happening in the region for many years. We have provided the fertile line for people who want to argue that God gave them instructions to murder and kill. And the last thing is about Israel, and Israel has a place. It's a very important argument, and has a cut in this world. Yes, as a representative of the Palestine national movement, I stand before you today and say, Israel has the right to exist. Israel has a place in this world. We gave Israel 78% of our land, willingly, because we believe in relative justice. Absolute justice, they go back to where we came from. But we don't want them to go back to where they came from. There are so many Israelis, the majority of them were born in what was my father's home. I cannot displace another society. I do not want to displace another society. Let them live there. Our problem is not with Israel. Our problem is not with Israeli people. Our problem is with Israel's ideology of exclusivity. Our problem is with Israel's expansion and occupation and colonization. What we offered them in 1988 and what we did in 1999, recognizing them, was real, was genuine. It came from every Palestinian, was collective, was endorsed by Yasser Arafat, was endorsed by the Palestine National Congress. Was real. But there are few of them who are greedy. Greed, unlimited appetite for theft, for control. We fight them. We will fight them. And I tell you, if we learned anything from Nelson Mandela, it was not just the fight, or it was not just the statesmanship and the building of this gorgeous, beautiful country. It was one word that came out of Mandela the most. Forgiveness. We will forgive our enemies. We will forgive our enemies. And we will build a society and state that will give them a place. Our constitution, I'm wrong, our basic law. We are drafting a constitution right now, and I am part of that. I read it. Our constitution allows for a Jewish woman to be the president of the state of Palestine. I am proud of that. So it is not a Muslim fight against a Jewish fight. It is not. It is a fight of those who are oppressed against the oppressor, of those who are occupied against the occupier, of those who are under segregation and apartheid against an apartheid regime, of those who want everything for themselves, of the privileged against the disprivileged. This is the fight. Don't believe anybody to say otherwise. And we are here, and I'm speaking of passion, we are here because we know that our walk has to be a walk of a universal fight. Because I tell you, no matter how much we do it, we will not be able to do it alone. We are strong, we are rooted, it's a beautiful society, and that's why we sustained. But we will not defeat this system on our own. We need each and every one of you. And what I heard today make me believe that the fight is not between the 11 million Palestinians and the 6 million Israelis. The fight is between the hundreds of millions of people around the world who love freedom, who love dignity, who cherish democracy, who cherish human rights, and between the few in Israel. Thank you very much.
Good morning, comrades, brothers, sisters. It gives us, and me particularly, a very, very special feeling of inspiration to be with you. Inspiration because I know what you have been doing as a BDS movement, as a faith groups over the last few years, and what I have just seen, your documentary has really shown how much you understood the situation better than many others around the world. And I'd like to start by what the mayor just ended by saying. Of course, Semaya, God is innocent of this. God does not choose his children, doesn't decide that this person is better because of color or creed or religion or height. I'll be privileged if it's on height. God is not a state agent that distributes land, that this land is for this man. God does not favor any of his sons and daughters. God does not send the machines of murder to kill 556 Palestinian children in Gaza only 3 months ago. God does not say that a soldier would enforce a woman to deliver her baby on a checkpoint. The Jewish God is innocent. Judaism is a religion that produced for us the 10 Commandments. And I know personally that Jews worldwide do not want to associate their name with this. I know that there is a movement, a growing movement everywhere of Jewish voices that are saying, not in our name, not in our name, including in the United States of America, by the way. And by the way, if I am really to talk about this, let me take 1 minute to say that 70% of the Jewish community in the United States, let alone elsewhere, are the liberal, the pro-civil rights movement, the ones who supported Martin Luther King, and the ones who actually formed the anti-apartheid movement and supported Europe in America. They are the ones who founded the anti-war movement during the Vietnam War. If you go and see who speaks on behalf of our rights in America today, the 10 most adamant speakers are all Jews, from Noam Chomsky downward. This is about a small little group, very organized, very vicious. Not against Muslims or against Christians or against this or that, but with the idea of control and subjugation. You are very important to us, not only as a group that is in the action side of the story, but as a group that come from various faith-oriented backgrounds, because this conflict has been tainted by this. Zionism was very clever in confusing us, all of us. Zionism was very clever in creating the so-called Judeo-Christian culture. Zionism was very clever in penetrating the so-called Christian Zionism, the evangelical movement. Zionism was very clever in rewriting history. Only the last few days we have had elections in Israel. I'm sure some of you have followed the elections. Regrettably, the Israeli voters have re-elected Benjamin Netanyahu again, giving him a decisive victory. And some of you may have heard what Netanyahu had to say in the run-up to the elections. He said 2 things primarily. The first, the Israeli voters should elect him because if they do so, he will block the emergence of a Palestinian state. The second thing, the Israeli voters should go and vote for him because the Arab citizens of Israel are voting. Such a racist statement. Do you think God told Benjamin Netanyahu that blocking the emergence of a Palestinian state is a religious thing? And do you think Netanyahu is saying it because he's an ideological man? No, Netanyahu is saying it because he knows this has become popular in the Israeli society. Now, why the Israeli society and the mindset is there? Why, when we know that Israel has to make a moment of a choice? Israel has to decide, should it want to continue occupying 6 million Palestinians inside Israel-Palestine, it will become a full-fledged apartheid state, and it will face you. Why? What is the rationale that is happening today? How do you justify the Israeli mindset? And I tell you, yesterday we have touched on it in our remarks very quickly. It is about privileges. It's about privileges. It's about advantages. It's about your villa that has a swimming pool, a few hundred meters away from our refugee camps. It's about resources. It's about money. It's about land. It's not about religion. It's not about ideology. Religion is used and abused to justify making fortunes, to justify living on a disproportionate piece of land, to justify dehumanizing the other, to justify laying siege on 1.8 million people in Gaza for the last 8 years, to justify the utter slaughterhouse vis-a-vis our property and land in Jerusalem, the uprooting of our culture that has been there for millennia, for thousands of years. I just want to give you one statistic. An average Israeli now earns $34,000 per year. An average Palestinian earns less than $2,000 per year. We live in a very small little piece of land. Only a few kilometers separate between us. And if this is the heart of the matter, then what you do is the right approach. Let us not hit them in the heads. Violence does not pay in our context. Let's hit them in the pocket. It's much more painful in this context. Much more painful in this context. Lieberman said only a few days ago, Lieberman is an Israeli leader. He heads an Israeli political party, and he was the foreign minister up until very recently. And he said that, the best way to deal with Arabs and with Palestinians is to use an axe, to hit them. He was quoted on the Jerusalem Post only 2 days ago. You can refer to it. No, Mr. Lieberman, we are not going to use your approach, and we reject your approach. We reject it not only on morality, but also on our ability really to involve and to mobilize millions of people around, not by the using of axes, but by the use of our own decision, what to consume and what to buy and what not to buy. And Israel, for the last few years, have been saying the biggest threat facing the state of Israel is, they call it, the delegitimization of Israel, i.e. the BDS movement. They're right in there, because they know isolation is a very serious business for them. They don't say Iran is the biggest threat. Those who are strategic know that the biggest threat is the citizens of the world who are taking action against these illegalities. And the question for us now, after having been lost in a so-called peace process for 21 years as Palestinians, is where to go from here, what to do, and here I want to end. We have fought, as your film showed, we have fought very hard. We have fought so many intifadas, so many wars, a revolution that started almost at the very same time like the ANC. Yasser Arafat, who has taken upon him to defend the very same ideals that Nelson Mandela defended and spent his good years in prison for. The ideals of freedom and liberty, of equality, of decency. And I think Yasser Arafat was listening to Mandela in that court in the 1964 when Mandela said that these ideals, the ideals of freedom, are ideals that I want to live for, but if required, I am prepared to die for. Arafat physically died for his ideals and defended his ideas. But the question for us, where to go from now, and we are learning from your own experience in South Africa. We are doing three things. First is unity. National unity is absolutely paramount to stand together against all this. We know it's difficult, as it was difficult here in South Africa. We know it takes courage, it takes determination and a vision. I assure you we have it. We do have a national consensus government now in Palestine. We do have one legitimate representation for all Palestinians, that's the PLO. And the PLO will include every single other Palestinian factions. Don't listen to all this. The PLO has one agenda, to include every Palestinian faction in it. By the way, the Israeli war on Gaza, the aggression on Gaza, resulted from our formation of a national consensus government. The Israeli government did not like the fact that we just formed the national consensus government. It was a reaction. It was their way, it was a coup d'etat against our national consensus government. So unity is something we learned from you, and unity is something that we are determined to do. And I think you will hear some good news in the very near future. Second, There is no way but to resist the illegality. Resistance in our situation, like it was during apartheid, is not a choice. It's an obligation. We must resist. When your child is being harassed at a checkpoint, when your brother is being arrested for no accusation whatsoever, when almost one third of your society is being besieged in Gaza, resistance is not a luxury. It is an obligation. The question is only about the means of resistance. And we have decided to adopt non-violent means of resistance, as your film showed. Not only because non-violence is a moral tool, but also because it is an effective tool. And you have been following what we have been doing for the last few years, from going to the United Nations and joining the UN as a member state, observer member state, to signing all international treaties, including the Rome Statute, including the International Criminal Court. We are taking Israel to court. Israel, on a daily basis, commits war crimes. And so long as they believe and feel and sense that they can walk away with it, they will continue doing it. Well, we will stop them. We will stop them. Not by the use of X's, as Lieberman said just yesterday, but the use of international law and legality, the use of our system, all of us together. Israel withheld our own money for the last 3-4 months, our own taxes, the Palestinian taxes, because we decided to go and sign international treaties, because we committed ourselves to international law, because we gave jurisdiction to the ICC, the International Criminal Court, over our own territory. If Israel fears us taking it to court, they should stop committing crimes. And the last and most important point that we want to learn from you and continue on this path is, once you achieve your goal, you have enough forgiveness in your heart for your enemies. And you build the future not based on hatred or resentment, but based on a statesmanship for sharing a country together. And I tell you, the Jews are not going anywhere, and the Israelis should remain where they are. There are historic injustices, and I don't think there can be an absolute justice in that part of the world. I, as a Palestinian, would want them to live there, but I don't want them to live as a privileged society that builds all these systems to discriminate against my society. Once that is removed, I think we will have to find the formula like Nelson Mandela did in your very country, a formula of inclusion and social cohesion for everybody. We have to find the formula for building, not only a formula for resisting, building our country, a country that will not just be another country, a country that will be prosperous, and a country that will be a light, as it was once, a light for nations and a bridge for civilizations. And lastly, really, I came from Palestine with my colleagues, and we are going back to Palestine. Things are going from bad to worse, but I'm always told that, it's that moment of the darkest moment when the light is about to come out. And I tell you, we have fought very hard and we are winning the war. Israel has won all the battles, but it has lost the war. Because you cannot win the war only by tanks. You cannot win the war only by F-35s and F-16s, by 260 nuclear warheads. You don't win a war like this. You need the morality side of the story, and we have won the moral argument. You need the political aspirations and legitimacy, and we have won it. 138 countries voted for us. Only America, Canada, Micronesia, Marshall Island voted with Israel, and even America is changing, I assure you. We have also won the legal argument and the legal battle. Go take Israel anywhere in the world and you will win that. What we keep losing is that of the military battle. And I tell you, a military would easily win over another military. An army would easily engage another army. But we are not an army. We are a nation. And what a hell of a nation. A nation that is very deeply rooted in thousands of years of history. And therefore, I don't think Israel can ever win over us in the military arena. And I believe once we adopt non-violence, we will neutralize and start neutralizing their military arena. As your film said, the emerging superpower is these international citizens of the world like you, who are taking matters in their hands and telling the Israelis that injustice will not continue. Thank you very much, comrades, and you have a partner in us, and we'll continue.